again, when I teach personal finance programs in the community, and I was a county agent in Sussex County for 26 years before I became a specialist, and I still live up in Sussex County. I used to do a coat of arms activity when I began a class. So depending on the class topic, I would have the sections of the coat of arms kind of match the topic of the day. So some of the things you might want to be thinking of when you're planning your family meeting, when you're thinking about the things that you want to discuss with family members, are some of the answers to these questions. And you may have heard of this, the technique of talking to people where you have I messages. So instead of beginning a sentence saying, well, you said this or you did that, the I message expresses your feelings about something, so people understanding the feelings behind the message. So one way to get across that is to think about the answers to the questions, what is my greatest financial dream, my number one dream for retirement? And try to get that crystallized so you can share that with another person. What is your number one retirement fear? I'm going to tell you a little bit later about some of the work we did with focus groups with New Jersey farmers back in 2008, because that was what informed the Later Life Farming website that we put up about 6 years ago. And I remember doing one of the focus groups up in Sussex County, and the farmer, husband and wife were there, and they said their biggest retirement fear is that their children wouldn't talk to each other after they passed, and that was a really big concern of theirs. Might be thinking about your savings goal, and I'll be talking later on about different sources of income and different types of savings for retirement. What is the best way for you to save for retirement? Because obviously you've got different cash flow than somebody would have a steady paycheck would, so your way of savings might be different than other people. And then your planned retirement age. And it's okay to put never there. And as you heard Bob mention, a lot of people are saying they're not planning to retire. But they may scale back. They came up in the focus groups too. Remember, we had a farming couple from Hunterdon County at the other focus group, and their idea of retiring was to sell half the herd and have 50 cows to milk instead of 100. So that was going to be their planned retirement. So everybody has a different number, if you will, and it might be an age number, but never is an appropriate response too. But again, if you kind of get these things crystallized and you talk about them maybe as a couple, then when you involve a larger circle of people, you have some of these things kind of clarified. Bob alluded to the fact that farmers are getting older. So if you haven't seen the numbers, back in 2007 for both New Jersey and national, it was 57.1 as the average age of farmers. In the latest Census of Agriculture in 2012, and these figures came out last year, 58.3 nationally, 59.5 in New Jersey. So our farmers here in the state are a little bit older than the national average. And it's been a 30-year increase. So for the last 30 years, every time they've done a census of agriculture, the average age of farmers has been getting older. And of course, farmers tend to work longer than people in many other occupations, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that your home and your family and your business are all kind of intertwined. You know, the home might be right on the same parcel of land or nearby to where the farm is. So people have that intertwining, which tends to be able to allow them to continue to work longer. Government statistics say that farm families have a ratio of median net worth, median meaning half below and half above, 7.5 to 1 ratio, farmers' median net worth to the U.S. household in general. But as we've been talking about, much of that wealth is illiquid. So it's tied up in land and buildings and things that don't readily convert to a stream of income without doing some of the things that Bob just talked about before. So some of the factors that go into retirement decision making, and this is for everyone, whether they're in farming or not, these are just some of the main factors. One, of course, is health. So that would be the worker's health and their spouse's health, and that is one of the major reasons why people retire at an age earlier than they planned, is that they simply have some health issues to deal with. Or maybe they have some family considerations. For example, caregiving for an older parent that may cause people to have to drop out. Now that may be more of an issue for people who have a job with an employer. If you're in a farming situation, you may have a little bit more flexibility for that caregiving, but maybe not if that person you're caregiving for is in South Dakota or Florida or something like that. What are your employment options? And we actually have a whole module in the later life farming course that we developed that talks about employment options using your skill set as a farmer. If you didn't want to continue farming, what are some of the other places where you might be able to seek employment using those skills? Health insurance is huge. So the access to and the cost of health insurance. And we do have more options in this country than we had 2 years ago because people do have the ability to shop on the healthcare.gov exchange. And of course in New Jersey, they opted to use the federal healthcare.gov. We don't have a state-specific healthcare program. So that's good for people who need some health insurance before they qualify for Medicare at 65. And then of course the status of your investments and how much that you've been able to invest in. You know, obviously the more resources you have there, the better. And then a lot of it is personal choice. And many people say, I don't want to retire. And you're seeing that in all occupations, but particularly in agriculture, it's always been a very strong thing that people want to do. In fact, we found out very quickly at those focus groups that farmers that we were talking to didn't relate to the R word at all. So we stopped using it. We took R out of the vocabulary and we called it later life farming because we wanted to acknowledge that people are older, but they also want to continue farming in some capacity. Okay, so these are 4 key questions. And again, this is for everybody, whether you're in agriculture or not. These are the questions that are really going to drive your retirement decision. Can you afford it? Is it the right time? How will your spouse and family be affected? And of course, for farming, that's even more important because you've got all those succession issues that people who just have regular employment with a company wouldn't have to deal with, that kind of thing. And then do you want to retire? Personal choice. So can I afford it? Most of your current bills are going to come whether you decide to step back from, you know, a full-time working to maybe scaling back. And Bob alluded to that. I mean, can any of you think of any bill that you have that's gone down? I mean, we've had this little respite with the gas prices, which has been great, but you know, they're starting to go back up again. Unless you proactively do something like maybe refinance a loan or something, it's kind of hard to think about bills that go down, you know, because things tend to go up with inflation, or the utility bills, you know, the Board of Public Utilities will raise the rates and we'll pay more for using our energy, that sort of thing. And then there may be some new expenses because people do tend to spend more on leisure activities when they get older, perhaps. They have more time. And then healthcare costs tend to go up as people get older. And then you have physical assets that are going to wear out. Has anybody been able to keep a car for 25, 30 years? Okay, there's always one. There was one yesterday too. There's always somebody in the class that says, yes, yeah, I've had a car that long. But most people, you know, your cars are going to wear out. You're going to have to get a couple cars throughout your later life. And then ditto for your body parts. Anybody want to admit to having body parts wear out where you've had to replace body parts, you know, hips and knees and all that kind of stuff. So there's some costs involved to that. Okay, is it the best time, right time to retire? Again, this is a very personal decision. There is no right time. Some of it has to do with, are you able to keep up with the requirements for a job? You know, in office occupations, it might be learning the latest technology, you know, to keep up with certain software programs. Agriculture, of course, is a very physical occupation. So can you do the physical work that's involved, whether it's lifting hay bales or whatever it happens to be? And then there's the economics of earning. We're going to talk a little bit about Social Security today, and they do have something called the earnings limit, where if you start to claim benefits before your full retirement age, and then you earn over a certain dollar amount, you would be having some of those benefits taken back from you. So you kind of have to look at that situation. Again, health is very key. Other job options or life passions, you know, things that you would rather be doing with your time. And again, that varies from person to person. And then, of course, the big thing is what Bob was talking about before, your ability to transition the farm to others. And, you know, most of what we've been hearing this morning has been assuming that there's been a child in the scenario. But you may come across situations where there aren't any children in the family. And, you know, what are the transitioning options then? And it's some of the things that Bob was talking about, but it may not necessarily be a family member. Okay, how will your spouse and family be affected? Well, if you decide to scale back the enterprise, for example, that farming situation where they sold half their herd and had 50 cows to milk instead of 100, you're scaling back your production, you're going to scale back the income for sure. So is that something that would affect family members? You have to kind of consider that. What are their income sources? What kind of insurance do you have should you die that would kick in to provide some income that might be lost when, you know, a spouse is dying? What are your farm transfer decisions? And again, they might be kind of structured in such a way, you heard about installment sales, where there'll be kind of a steady income coming in, or rental, you know, where you'll have some rental income coming in. What are some of those decisions? You know, how will they affect not only you, but your spouse? And then your spouse's retirement dreams, because just because you have dreams doesn't mean necessarily your spouse has the same dreams. And they found that in families across this country, one of the biggest stickling points, and again, it's not just farmers, in fact, it's probably more people who aren't farming because they don't necessarily have that tie to the land that you all would have, is people deciding where to retire to. And Wall Street Journal had an article a few years ago that said, he wants Maine, she wants Florida, and had a picture of a U.S. map being kind of split in half, you know, and people kind of couldn't decide where they want to go. And then obviously your spouse's retirement savings, and Bob kind of alluded to, it wouldn't be great if you had a wealthy spouse, but if you can't have a spouse that's independently wealthy, a spouse with a retirement plan is probably a good option, you know, so if you have those resources, that's a good thing too. But again, you have to look at how will the spouse and the family be affected by the decision. And then, do you want to retire? So some questions there are, do I like what I do? And probably you do, or you wouldn't be farming as long as you have been. So for anybody in any occupation, and I would be as guilty of this as anyone else in the room, I love what I do. So to give that up, it's going to be very difficult, because I'm also guilty of number two, and I'll be very upfront about that. How central is work to my life? Work has been too central to my life, you know, and many of us would probably admit that. And that makes it more difficult to step back from work if it's been a really big part of your life. You know, for some of us, our self-identity is our work identity. What do we want to do next? And again, many people haven't figured that out. What am I going to do? You know, how am I going to spend my time? When I teach retirement planning classes, I often have people take out a sheet of paper and I say, okay, let's pretend that you are no longer working full-time in a job. What would be a typical day? What would that day look like? And you just get a lot of blank stares. You know, people just don't have a clue how they would be spending their days if they weren't doing their job and their commute and the things that they do on a normal basis. And then, could you smoothly transition to something else, assuming you wanted to? And that could be a new type of job. And again, we have that module that talks about some options. A small business of some sort, maybe not even a farming business. Sometimes people want to transition from a farming business to, I don't know, small engine repair. You have those kind of skills that you've been using all the years. Or maybe you want to do some volunteer work. Maybe you want to serve on a board. You know, I know farmers that I've known up in Sussex County who got more active in like Board of Agriculture and things of that sort as they got older. Clubs. Maybe politics, maybe even want to run for freeholder or something, who knows. So you look at those kind of things. And then spending time with friends and family. You know, so what are some of the things that you want to kind of transition to? So let me switch gears and just talk a little bit about the process of calculating what you need to save for retirement. Studies have shown that less than half of Americans have ever attempted any kind of retirement savings calculation. And that includes going online, using an online calculator, any kind of downloadable form, anything, any structured way. Less than half of Americans have done that. And unfortunately, when you don't have a good roadmap, and Bob was talking before about giving sons and daughters a roadmap as kind of knowing where they might stand in the future of a farm. But people also need a roadmap for their finances because you have to get from point A to point B. And a lot of people never identify what point B is anyway. And then you kind of have to figure out, well, what's that part in between A and B? How long is it going to take? Do you want to get from point A to point B in 25 years, 30 years? What speed are you going to go? For example, if you've got very conservative investments, you're going to be going at a lower speed than somebody who might have some stock in their portfolio who might be able to grow their investments a little bit faster. So those are all types of things that go into the calculation. So whether you do it online, and I'll give you some tools at the end, show you some websites you can visit, or whether you do it paper and pencil with a handheld calculator, they're usually going to ask you these 5 variables because they're really key in the whole discussion. What is your age at retirement? So again, you may say never, I'm never going to retire, but you may be scaling back. So use that as an age to shoot for. And again, it's going to vary from person to person. It could be 75. I wouldn't make it some number that's like 95 or something because you're going to get small savings requirements. But what if you can't productively work till 95? You may be shorting yourselves on the amount you need to save. So you have your age at retirement, the amount of money that you've currently saved. Just a show of hands, how many of you have individual retirement accounts of any sort, Roth or traditional? Okay, so some of you, maybe about a quarter. We had a pretty small percentage yesterday at the Bridgewater class. So obviously, if you don't have those things going, you'll have to look at other sources of income, and I'll be talking more about that after lunch. How much money do you need as a percentage of your pre-retirement income? What do you think the right answer to that question is? What percentage of your now income should you have in retirement? 80–90%. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else want to take a stab? I'm not saying you're wrong. The answer, I always tell my students at Rutgers, there's only one great answer to give in my class, and that's it depends. Because then I tell them they have to kind of back that up with a discussion of why it depends. There are people who will say that you can live on 50% of your pre-retirement income. I don't know about staying in New Jersey. That's going to be pretty difficult. So it really depends. It depends on a lot of decisions that people make before and after retirement as to whether maybe they downscale their lifestyle, move to a different place, all those kind of things. But the nice thing about the online calculators is you can just put in different percentages. So you can say 90%, 80%, 75%. There are some certified financial planners who tell their clients to plan on 100% because at least in the early years of retirement, you may be doing a lot of stuff that, costs money to do. So it's kind of a personal thing. And again, you kind of have to know what's important to you, what your plans are, what you think those plans are going to cost. The rate of return on your investments obviously is key. I mentioned that. And the number of years in retirement or your life expectancy. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, how you can at least do some estimates on that. Of course, we don't have total control. So let's start with age at retirement. Some people say they want to do an early retirement, but many people say no, I want to work as long as I possibly can. The problem is if you retire early, you lose the value of compound interest by working longer, having more savings, more time for that savings to grow with compound interest. Some of you may have heard of the rule of 72, that if you take an interest rate and divide it into 72, it tells you how many years it takes to have a sum of money double. And it's any sum of money. It doesn't depend on the amount of the money. It's just the relationship between these two factors. So if you had an 8% average return, which of course is going to involve some stock in your portfolio, you're not going to get that on any CDs these days, it would take 9 years, 8 into 72. The other problem with early retirement is people get lower Social Security benefits, and those are permanently reduced if you take Social Security before your full retirement age. And we'll talk more about that later on after the break as well, after lunch. Okay, amount of money you currently saved. How many of you have ever done a net worth statement where you add up assets minus debts? Okay, it's a good idea to do a net worth statement. You probably want to do several. You might want to do a personal net worth statement that has all your personal assets and debts, what you own, like the value of your personal house and your car and your personal property, and then debts might be things like credit card debt and mortgages and things like that. You might want to, and you probably have done it if you've gotten any kind of farm loan, you would have a net worth or a balance sheet for your business, and then you'd have the value of your business assets and your business debts. And some people, I know the extension folks in Iowa even have what they call a consolidated balance sheet for farmers, where you kind of mesh everything together. So in one document, you have your personal and your business net worth, assets and debts. But a good way to see what you've saved for retirement is to look at the personal net worth statement and see what you have on the asset side that you've kind of identified as resources for retirement. And we have a worksheet on our website at Rutgers. That's what that link is for. You can download. It's a paper and pencil sheet. Okay, then how much do you need? Again, I mentioned it could be 50%, it could be 100%. Some financial planners refer to retirement in 3 stages. You have the go-go, the slow-go, and the no-go. So, in the early years of retirement, when people are active and, physical health is good, that's when they may do a lot of stuff. So that's the go-go phase. And then maybe you slow down after a period of time. Don't do as much traveling, don't do as much maybe of anything that you were doing in the earlier phase. You just kind of cut back. And then unfortunately for some people, the last phase, the no-go, if people have a real physical ailment or they're in a nursing home or something of that sort, that can be very expensive too. So that active phase particularly tends to be pretty expensive for folks. But again, it's all a very personal thing. And that's why I like the online calculators, because you can just keep changing the percentage. If I want to retire on 80% of my pre-retirement, you do the calculation for that. You want to do 90%, you want to do 70%, you just change the goal, and of course the savings numbers will adjust. So what are your goals? What are your lifestyle choices? You hear a lot of people about wanting to get out of New Jersey because of our high tax structure. We've got the inheritance tax, we've got the estate tax, we've got the property tax, we've got the highest auto insurance rates. We've got a real problem up in Sussex County. In fact, our freeholders are very concerned about it. They've just appointed a committee to look into it. They've realized with census data that they're losing the millennials. The millennials are leaving Sussex County and they're not coming back, and the boomers are getting out too. So you don't have a whole lot of people that are left. And we're dropping population, the schools, it's a real problem. So some people are leaving. Even if you just go over the bridge to Pennsylvania, it can be a whole lot different cost structure for some people. And then resources. And again, if you have somebody with an off-farm employer that provides health insurance, that's a great resource. Inheritances could be a resource if they were in the picture. Again, everybody's situation is different. And then rate of return. This is some data that goes back to 1926. There's a company called Ibbotson which tracks investment performance on an annual basis. And from 1926 to 1923, you can see there that stocks have had an average annual return. Not to say that there haven't been a lot of down years like 2007 to 2009, but 10.1% versus 6% for corporate bonds, 3.5% for Treasury bills. However, we also know from statistics $5.9 trillion is sitting in passbook savings accounts in this country. And how much are they getting? Anybody check the rate on your passbook savings account lately? Maybe 1/4% if you're lucky. maybe a half if you're using an online bank or a credit union instead of a regular bank. So you've got a lot of money sitting in very low interest accounts, and then about half of U.S. households have no stock exposure whatsoever. So they own no stocks, no stock funds, no stock in their 401k, just nothing. So when the Dow Jones is reported every night in the nightly news, it means absolutely nothing to half of the people in this country because they have nothing invested in the stock market. So again, the numbers that you plug into any kind of calculator have to reflect the investment choices that you've made. Okay, and then we got this thing called life expectancy. So life expectancy is defined as how many number of years that you have left for people who have attained a certain age. So you'll often see things and they'll say your life expectancy at birth, your life expectancy at 65, for example. So if it's a 65-year-old couple, there's a 72% chance that one spouse in that couple will live to be 85 and a 45% chance that one spouse will live to age 90. And the thing to keep in mind is that if you have good health habits, so you're eating right, you're getting physical activity, you're getting enough sleep, your stress levels are pretty low, all the things that all the health experts tell us to do, you're probably going to have a higher life expectancy, and you're actually going to have higher out-of-pocket costs for your lifetime for health care than the unhealthy people who smoke and have health issues. And you might say, well, how can that be? Those unhealthy people, they should be spending more. Well, they tend to die earlier. So the people who have the healthier habits live longer, and then many of those expenses come later in their life. So when you're healthy, you have to be wealthy too. Okay, so life expectancy, you could just go to any search engine like Bing or Google and just type in the word life expectancy calculator, and you'll find a whole bunch of them out there. And I would recommend try at least 3 of them. Try to find calculators that have lifestyle questions. So these are the calculators that ask you, do you smoke? Do you drink a lot of alcoholic beverages? Do you wear seat belts? Have you had cancer? Has anybody in your family has cancer? All these basic things about your own personal health that have a direct impact on your life expectancy. Social Security has a calculator on their website, but it's very basic, and it's just based on average life expectancy, so it's not going to give you a real good personalized analysis. Also think about the genes in your family. Anybody have a family member that's lived to 100 or older? Anybody that's made it to the Today Show, where they call out your name, you had your 100th birthday? Okay, well, think about that too, because that's part of your gene pool as well, if you will. Okay, a lot of people, whether they're in farming or not, if they take the time to do some kind of retirement savings calculation, they realize that they're going to come up short. So what do? Well, you can do things before retirement, you can do things after retirement, or you can do both, combination, to try to close the gap between what you think you're going to need and what you are presently on course to have available to you. So obviously you could save more. If you can spend less, of course, and you can pay off debt. I happen to volunteer at a thrift shop up in Sussex County, and I'll tell you, thrift shops have gotten really accepted now. We're getting teenagers come in and 20-somethings, and more now we're getting men. When I first started volunteering a few years ago, we didn't have very many men coming in, but now it's becoming more of a thing. And I can't shop at a regular store anymore because, there's just such great deals at the thrift shop. So spending a little bit less, coming up with some more money to save. Some people will moonlight, take on a different type of job, or their spouse will, for additional income. You can invest more aggressively, but you need to realize that, there's a risk involved to that, and we'll talk more about investing later. And then also working longer. So those are things people can do before retirement. After retirement, sometimes it's a matter of trading down to a smaller home, moving to a less expensive location, working after retirement. And of course, that plays into what a lot of farmers are planning to do anyway, because you're not planning to retire. You want to continue working, have some income. Reverse mortgages, how many of us have seen all those ads on television with Fonzie and Fred Thompson, and they're all promoting reverse mortgages. Sale leaseback, where people will actually sell their home to an adult child, for example, and then lease it back. So they get the income from the sale, and then they continue to be able to stay in their own home for their lifetime. And then tax-efficient withdrawal. So when you do take the money out, typically if you have any tax-deferred plans, you want to keep those tax-deferred as long as possible. Now, once you get to age 70 and a half, you have to start making required minimum distributions. But you keep those tax-deferred accounts going as long as possible. Okay, so let me end here with talking about some resources that you can go to, places that you can get some information to do these kinds of calculations for yourself. And again, some of them you can do online, some of them you can do just downloading a worksheet and then working it out with paper and pencil. Purdue Extension has this really good website called Planning for Secure Retirement, and they have it broken up into 10 modules, and depending on what topic you're interested in, for example, Module 5 has to do with Medicare, number 4 is estimation. So each of these modules has links that link you to other places. And again, it's not something you would do necessarily in one sitting. You would pick out the topics you might be interested in, and then check out what you have an interest in, and maybe eventually get through the entire course, but at your own speed. This is the ballpark estimate. It's the simplest retirement planning tool to figure out what you need to save for retirement. And you can do it online. You can download a paper and pencil version, or you can simply fill in the boxes. There's a screenshot of what it looks like if you go online. And it's just meant to be what they call a ballpark estimate. It's not necessarily down to the penny, but it'll give you a rough estimate of what you need to save for retirement. They allow you to put in your own amount of retirement income, so again, you can make it any percentage of what your current income is. You can put in your own life expectancy. They give you a couple of choices, whether you want to use average life expectancy or higher, and they tell you what those higher percentages are for men and for women. And the only thing that they assume in the ballpark estimate is that you're getting a 3%, what they call a real rate of return on your money, which means a return after inflation. So that could be a little bit off if you have no money in stocks and it's all in 1% CDs, for example. But in order to keep it simple, they had to do that. So what you do is you fill in the boxes, all those key factors that I talked about before, and it will give you an annual savings amount. Now, for a lot of people who have somebody with a paycheck in the family, they would want to go another step and divide that by 52 or 26, depending on how many paychecks they get. For a farm family, it may not be as important to make regular savings deposits, because maybe your income, depending on the enterprise, is in a certain period of the year. So a lot of people, of course, in New Jersey tend to make more money in agriculture in the summer months when the weather is good. So it may be that you'll make your savings deposits kind of in one big lump sum versus people who might otherwise, have it taken out of paychecks throughout the year. We also have a worksheet on our website at Rutgers, and again, it's a downloadable paper and pencil. It's 20 steps. We have a few more steps where we break down, like dividing it by 52 and everything, so it makes it a little bit longer. But again, it's a tool that's out there. And then I don't know if any of you have heard of Monte Carlo Analysis. These are things that, this is a tool that many certified financial planners will use. And it has nothing to do with the casinos over in, in Monte Carlo there. What it is, it's a term that refers to probability analysis. And back 20 years ago, when computer power started getting really good for some of these financial calculations, what they do is they plug in all the historical performances of different types of investments. So like how stocks have done, bonds, and all time periods, including some, like 6 years ago when we had the financial crisis. And then what it does is it estimates probabilities. So they will estimate the probability of you having a successful retirement. And they define successful as having your money last for 30 years. Because studies have said one of the biggest fears of people in retirement is outliving their money. So they typically want to run these for 30 years. Particularly financial advisors will run it for 30 years because they don't want to be the financial planner for the client that runs out of money and they didn't do a very good plan. The only thing you have to do is really check the assumptions behind some of these calculators, and then GIGO. Anybody know what GIGO stands for? Garbage in, garbage out. So in other words, if you don't have really good data, if you don't plug in really good numbers for all the things that they ask you, you're obviously not going to get a very good answer. And then I just want to mention the later life farming course. So we put this together a few years ago, I guess 2008. We did the focus groups. So by 2009 it was done. Tell you the truth, we haven't gotten a whole lot of traffic to it over the years. We've marketed it, but I think that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this series of classes around the state, because I think it will mean more to you after you've heard some of these presentations, and you might be interested in visiting it. So we have 10 modules, and these modules were based on the focus groups that we had in 2008 with the farmers in Sussex and Hunterdon County. And we convened groups of farmers who were all over the age of 50, and we just picked their brain. And like I said, we asked them about their fears and their dreams. And what became very apparent to us during those focus groups is that farmers don't relate to the R word, as I told you. There was a lot of intense feelings about government interaction, and taxes and pinelands and highlands, they all kind of got lumped in together. So we have a whole unit that has to do with the government, in your retirement plans as a farmer. So I do encourage you to check them out. This is what a screenshot looks like. So of the first module, you can see we then have links to other places where you can click on to get information. And then all the names of the different chapters or units are along the side. So regulation and tax issues was the one that we really got into, all of those factors that affect farmers' retirement. And then we end the later life farming module, the whole website, with this summary page. So after you've gone through the modules, what are some of the action steps? So in the first module, we talk about life expectancy, so we encourage people to try one of the calculators and figure out what their life expectancy might be.